right, listeners. Well, I actually can't just say listeners anymore because we actually are video recording every single episode from here on out. Go check it out on YouTube. And so watchers, audience, today's episode is a very unique one. Usually when I use an episode for a deep dive into a specific topic, it's one that I want to learn about or want to bring about for the audience. The audience requests it, and it's a deep dive on a topic like growth in startups or a deep dive on climate tech. Today's deep dive is on something that is happening right now, and a lot of eyes are on it. It's the Airbnb IPO. And so this is a deep dive on a moment in a company's life going public. As listeners know, I sold my company to Airbnb in 2017. Was there for 2 years and did a handful of different things across a few different business lines and loved my time there. But I always knew that there was such a special story that wasn't being talked about when it came to Airbnb as a company, inside the walls, outside the walls. And with this IPO coming down the pike, a friend of mine said, we should do an episode, a below the line episode, just on the Airbnb IPO. And the friend was Marc McCabe, who was the first BD hire at Airbnb. And he was a fellow exec there when I was there, as well as another friend of ours, Lenny Rachitsky, who, he was on the email thread, and all three of us said, we should do an episode just talking about the Airbnb IPO and a deep dive into all of the reasons we think there might be upside, there might be challenges, and just all of our thoughts in a very super candid, honest fashion, which is the point of the podcast. So I'm really excited about today's episode with three former Airbnb executives talking about this momentous occasion in any company's life, but one that between the three of us is about 15 years of working at Airbnb. And the other unique thing is that all three of us are startup investors. So the lens in which we look at companies all day, every day is a lens in which we are also looking at Airbnb in this IPO moment and its lifetime. So without further ado, I'm really excited for this episode with Marc McCabe and Lenny Rachitsky for a deep dive on the Airbnb IPO. Let's get into it. This is Below the Line. 3, 2, 1, and we're live. Marc, Lenny. Good morning to you, Lenny. Marc, you're in Ireland
morning,
right
James.
now, so it's 6 p.m. Are you in Ireland or London?
I am. Good morning to both of you. It's 6 p.m. here, but I feel like I still live on West Coast time a lot.
Well, I'm sure you do, but you do get to enjoy in lead up to this episode, which is that this episode is a lead up to a momentous occasion for a company we hold dear, Airbnb, and we've all worked for. So it's somewhat of a celebratory moment in a company's life, even though it is just a moment in time. But you have what are you drinking right now, Marc?
Well, as it's hour appropriate here, I have a nice IPA, a California IPA, which I thought would kind of make me a bit nostalgic.
There we go. Can you introduce your friends to California IPAs in Ireland and they dig it?
Oh, it was, they've become well versed. I think around about 2015, 2016, the micro beer craze really caught on here, and now they're appropriately snobby about beers.
Oh, no way. And then, and Lenny, what are you drinking for this? I guess momentous. I hesitate to say momentous occasion because IPOs can go up, down, sideways, and it really doesn't matter. 12 months later, 10 years later. But what are you drinking?
But it's an occasion.
It is an occasion. It is an occasion.
I'm drinking my standard below the line beverage of matcha curry, matcha, L-theanine infused.
Amen.
Matcha curry.
And that's what I've got as well. Cheers to you guys.
Cheers to both of you.
I've got my finest matcha.
Same.
Which is matcha curry. Love those. Love the people behind that brand. And it really is damn good. I'm not just saying that because they're because I know.
Did you guys love the taste the first time you had it, or was it acquired?
I still don't drink it for the taste, like ever. It's just, oh, I'm going to be in the groove here in 30 minutes.
I have no problem with the taste. What do you find with the taste? Is it better?
Me or
it's a
Mark?
Yeah, for me, when I've tried it, I feel like I don't mind a matcha latte, which I've had before, but I just would never choose it because I prefer the flavor of, I don't know, coffee, even though I know it does lots of bad things too.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think about this all the time, or I was thinking about it recently, of just almost everything I'm taking in the morning or doing in the morning is, it's not for the senses. It's just for me to be able to have as productive a day as I can. So with matcha, and when I do recommend it to people, everybody's first thing is just like, and first and last thing is the taste, and then the effects. But maybe you should give it a try and do an A/B test on a day on matcha and a day on coffee. But I
will,
dude. We could talk about that for 5 hours, and both of you know that we could talk about that
podcast
forever. Yeah, exactly. Deep dive on matcha next. But first off, this is a really fun episode of a deep dive on Airbnb and the pending IPO. I'm really excited to chat with both of you about this. Between the three of us, there's something like 15 years of working at Airbnb. Mine was it was 2 years, so very. And for listeners, I sold my company to Airbnb. Sounds much cooler than it was. Sideways exit, and then I was there for 2 years, and an executive there for a really cool 2 years leading up to this IPO. And you two are execs there for a much longer period. Do you mind starting off for listeners, just telling listeners how you found your way to Airbnb? And we'll go deeper into that afterwards, but how you found your way to Airbnb, how long you were there for, and the different roles that you had while you were there. And then Mark, maybe you were there earlier than
I feel I had some small part to play in both of you coming aboard as well.
That's true.
I'll set the scene a little bit. So I started working in venture in 2010, and probably just prior to that is when I first heard about Airbnb, and it was because Brian was getting some press for his I'm only living in Airbnbs for the next year thing that he was doing at the time. So he was literally sleeping in different Airbnbs every few days and moving from one to the other, and almost seemed like maybe he was just trying to make sure the demand was kept up, and he was going to single-handedly ensure that there was enough demand for certainly all the Airbnbs in San Francisco. But shortly after I joined,
scale.
Yeah, exactly.
And real quick, is there, when you were working in venture capital in 2010, was it already this behemoth in the making, or was it kind of like, that's just one of the umpteenth thousandth startups that are kind of interesting?
It's kind of strange because they'd already done their Series A, I think, with Greylock. And, I only a couple of months after I joined, Brian came to give myself and the rest of the team an update. So I was working at SV Angel, Ron Conway's fund. And the update was, we think this is starting to work. We might hit $20 million in bookings this year, which, bear in mind, that's not fee revenue, it's bookings revenue. And I think it's kind of hard for me. The penny dropped the second I met Brian. I've backpacked a lot. I love getting under the skin of a city. I just moved to San Francisco a few months prior, and I was unable to get a lease on an apartment because I had no credit history. And here's this guy telling you, you should be welcomed wherever you are in the world. And so for me, it was instantaneous. And obviously, if they've been able to raise this round from Greylock, you're thinking this is, a pretty popular company in the venture community. But I think also at this stage, the vast majority of venture capitalists probably wouldn't have been super excited about staying in an Airbnb. And I think this kind of theme continued on for way longer than even I imagined it would. Like, I joined shortly after they raised their Series C from Andreessen, and, $1 billion valuation, you're thinking, this is an incredibly popular company. But I also know that multiple investors would go on to pass on subsequent rounds. And so I've always felt that Airbnb was kind of under the radar, but also beloved at the same time. And that was really my first experience was just meeting Brian. And, you know, if you've met Brian, he's an incredibly powerful personality. He speaks very, very quickly and animatedly. He's incredibly passionate about Airbnb and everything it stands for. He's the perfect, you know, ambassador for what Airbnb does. And it's hard not to be captivated. And I certainly was in that moment. I actually pretty much determined right then and there. I think I was walking him out of Ron's apartment. And in my mind, I remember thinking, like, I'm going to work for these guys someday. I don't know when and don't know how, but I'm going to make it happen somehow.
Wow, cool. And then what roles did you go on to hold within Airbnb's walls?
So my first role was a business development manager. I was really the first full-time business development person Airbnb hired. At the time I was working for Akbar Tabani. He'd been brought on as a consultant. He was helping them reorganize their entire payment structure. And from I've sat in that role for about 2 years. Then I had an idea to help push Airbnb in new verticals. And the one that I was really keen on was business travel. I incubated and then started that team up, ran that for about 3-4 years. And then I went on to head up operations for the R&D group Samara with Joe Gebbia for my last 2 years at the company.
As a fellow co-founder. All right, awesome. And Lenny, what about you? What was your on-ramp to Airbnb and what positions did you hold?
So it was kind of it's a fun story. Okay, so I started a company called LocalMind back in 2010, and I started in Montreal. We launched at South by in 2011 in March, and as you do at South by, I went to a bunch of parties, which becomes important later. So went to South by, launched, got some press, got some attention, came back to Montreal because of the press and attention, raised money. Started to kind of take it to the next level and actually moved to San Francisco at that point. And maybe a year after we moved to San Francisco, Joe Bott, who was our head of product and for a long time, Joe Zade, we call him Joe Bott, reached out and was just like, he just like reached out asking what we're up to. And I was like, where did I meet this guy? Turned out we were at some party at South by, which I don't remember at all because I think I was very drunk. But it ended up being really important to this story. And so we started chatting. Initially, it was just like, maybe we collaborate on some stuff. Maybe there's like a thing your team can help us with at Airbnb. But it kind of, as it does, turns into maybe we should just acquire you guys and see where that goes. And so I remember him coming to the office and we like wanted to make us look bigger than we were. So we printed out this huge banner of LocalMind on the wall, and we like printed out our press clippings to make us feel really important and successful. And we ended up selling the company to Airbnb in 2012, and so joined the company July 2012. And I remember actually visiting the office when we were in negotiations and seeing Marc there. And I forgot to mention, actually, when we were raising money, I actually pitched Marc while he was at SV Angel.
That's right.
Around.
I think we met at South by for the first time, Lenny.
Huh. Okay,
yeah.
Another fortuitous South by meeting.
Exactly.
Those South bys were hazy, to be honest.
Exactly.
But that's a good example of, don't sleep on getting out and meeting people when building a company, because it sounds like it was, fortuitous for a couple of reasons. And so you'd pitched Marc, and so then you saw him at the office?
Yeah, I pitched Marc. It didn't work out with SV Angel for whatever reason. And then Marc was working at Airbnb as we were negotiating, and I saw him in the office, and we couldn't say anything as M&A goes. So we were just kind of awkwardly exchanging hellos.
And did Marc know what was going on?
Tell us, Marc.
I did. So Lenny was working with, who was it, Lenny, that you were working on the acquisition with?
Oliver.
Oliver, that's right. And Oliver had mentioned that you guys were in the process at the time. And I remember sort of waxing lyrical about you guys, because I'd actually, once you'd pitched me that time, and it was a tough time for, I think, location-based social, in that you were just coming off the back end of the wave. You'd had Foursquare, obviously Koala, and I loved it because you could obviously ask very quick questions to folks who were in the location. It was just hard to find people who were there. But I had remembered our meeting. And when you hear about 1,000 pitches a year from startups. That's actually very few pitches that probably stand out over the course of that year. And I really remembered sort of Lenny and the team. And I remember immediately going to speak with Ollie and thinking and saying, like, listen, I've only been here about 4 or 5 months at this point, but these guys are going to fit in this building just fine.
Oh, that is, well, and I'll give my brief on-ramp, and then we'll get into what I know listeners want to hear more about is the experience of being at Airbnb, our views on the company, the culture, and this window in time when people have a chance to, decide if they want to invest in it publicly or not. But the on-ramp also goes back to Marc. It was 2012, and a reporter was just talking to me a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and I was telling him this story, and it was really cool just to rethink about this because I hadn't thought about it in a while. But about 3 days into moving to Silicon Valley to Palo Alto for Y Combinator, Paul Graham intros me to the founders of Airbnb and just says, "You guys should meet." And my co-founder and I should meet with Airbnb founders. And this was January 2012. So Airbnb was certainly on everyone in tech's radar. But we were coming from Texas. We were like, okay, there must be some reason that we should meet. And so we meet, and we were building, long story short, technology that could fit within Airbnb's ecosystem. And so got to meet with the founders and went to that office that you went to, Lenny, the 99 Rhode Island. I imagine that's the one you went to. So, so it was very cool. And then immediately afterwards met with Marc, and it wasn't JoBot. It was.
It was, yeah, I think so.
Maybe there was someone else who was the head of product maybe then, or right before that. Who was the director of product?
I mean, the only two people working on product at the time, I think, were JoBot and Jonathan Golden. Okay, maybe it was someone else. Nick, the name. Nick Grandy.
Yeah, maybe that. Yeah, exactly. So, anyhow, we met, and then you and JoBot, we met again, and you all said something similar. Maybe you said to Lenny, you're like, maybe y'all should just join. So anyhow, we end up.
We did. I think we were pretty explicit about it, actually. We were like, listen, I think you were just in your first or second week of Y Combinator.
Right.
And we sort of said, this is going to be tough. You should just come work with us. And we loved you guys from the first second we met you. And also like felt that you were working on something that was something that should become a core competence of Airbnb. But it just took a little bit longer.
Yeah, it did. And it was so we turned down, and I remember chatting with you all a few, maybe a year later, 2 years later. Also, we were maybe 10 employees. Also, we're like, no, we'd rather really build out our own thing. And after 5 years of building out our own thing, we were in a position where we were much more amenable to the overture. And
a nice way of saying he was crushing it.
No, we were actually, we were for a little bit, and then we were like, you know what? Kind of like Venmo in our space had done before. We were like, okay, I think we need to partner up with something bigger. And so we basically pulled up I called up JoBot and said, hey, and this is a below the line version that I haven't shared anywhere. So I went to a dinner with Amex and chatted with the CEO, and then I called up JoBot and I was like, we need to get bought, and I hope Amex buys us. But then I called up JoBot and I said, hey, there's and the Amex CEO, there was light interest, but I was to maybe have another conversation, not light interest to acquire us. I said, hey, we're chatting with Amex and directly with the CEO about potential acquisition, and this is like 24 hours after meeting the CEO for the first time, just at a dinner, and chatted with him for a total cumulative 7 minutes. And I was like, there's chatting with the CEO, but we'd really like to end up at Airbnb. So long story short, we maneuvered our way into the acquisition at Airbnb. And this will be relevant for later in this conversation. For so many important reasons, I had already started investing in companies. I had a semblance of an understanding of what made certain juggernauts tech and really wanted to end up at Airbnb. So pulled every move we could to end up at Airbnb, and so we ended up through acquisition as well. And then I was there for about 2 years in a few different roles of spinning up different business lines. One was social travel, one was Airbnb concerts, and one was something that hasn't launched yet. I don't know if it will ever launch, but it was amazing to get to have this reunion with you, Marc. I remember on, maybe it was day one or maybe it was a day before, we were emailing back and forth, and it just felt so cosmically right to be there. And it was so awesome to join with people that we had looked up to as founders that were a few years younger. Just everything that Airbnb had built, I think from the outside looking in, if you're not in tech, it's just a website. But within tech, for the last decade, everyone has been looking up to Airbnb across so many different ways of the way they built the product, the brand, the movement. We'll get into it in the episode, but there were so many different things that they were doing right. That was really exciting. So we felt really blessed for that. So that really brings me to the next question is, within your roles there, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but of saying that you felt like it was a special place, but within your roles there or within your navigation to joining Airbnb, what made it special as a company, and the real, it doesn't need to be the flowery language of alumni having left, but just the real below the line attractions to the company, as well as the things that you were hesitant about when you were joining, because putting 10 grand of your personal money, $5,000, $1,000 into a company in a public stock, you might not think about it as much as you think about when you're joining a company to work there for ostensibly several years. So in other words, you two, or all three of us, have gone through that decision-making process of investing, in our case, our time in the company. What was the mental calculus like? What were your reservations and what were you excited about? And we can start with you, Lenny.
For joining?
Yeah, for joining. What was that mental calculus like?
For us, it was a little unique because we were trying to figure out what did we do with our company, and we had no plans to sell. And once we started going down that route, we kind of realized we're probably going to sell the company at some point. And so then it was just like, who should we consider selling this to? Because this is probably not going to IPO, this simple location-based mobile app. And so then we just thought through what other companies are out there that would be as interesting as Airbnb, and we just honestly couldn't think of any. And actually, the first time I even learned of Airbnb was while we were shopping for. This is kind of a fun story. While we were shopping for attorneys for our company, we talked to this one guy who was flipping through his portfolio of companies that he represents, and he had this Airbnb logo in there. He's like, "Oh, here I represent Airbnb," and we're like, "Okay, I don't know what that is really, but I've heard a couple things about it." And we went with someone else, and that ended up being the lawyer that Airbnb worked with that did our deal later.
Oh, really?
Which, don't know if that would have been good or bad if we ended up working with him or not. But back to your question, I think there's a couple ways to think about it. Maybe one way is just what surprised me about Airbnb when I joined versus what I thought it would be on the outside. And I think one of the biggest surprises to me was on the outside, Airbnb looks kind of like a bunch of really nice people with this amazing community and really nice focus on design and brand and things like that. But I think what really surprised me and inspired me, honestly, within Airbnb is just how aggressive they are and how they never settle for just good enough or just hey, things are going to go fine. We don't need to double down on anything. Let's just kind of see how this goes. I was really impressed with their ability just to never take anything for granted and always shoot further, shoot bigger, find ways to move faster and think bigger about things, which is really hard to do and continue to do, especially when people look at you as you're a bunch of nice people and you're not gonna do those kind of things. So that was really nice to see. What
about any reservations that you had? And for the entirety of Airbnb's existence, the hesitations with it either as a business or as a product for customers. I mean, it's writ large everywhere you go. When you work there, people, family members tell you things like, I don't want to stay in someone's apartment. What were some of the, I didn't have those hesitations in my head. I was like, this thing isn't going away. This is going to be massive. But interested if you had any of those reservations or any reservations at all with the business or, I guess really with the business.
I was super bullish, and actually our lead investor was not at all bullish, and they actually didn't want us to do the deal because they just didn't see the potential, and most of the deal was based on the future potential of stock, and they're just like, no, this is the dumbest deal we've ever seen. What are you doing? Why would you sell at this? And no, we were the opposite. We're just like, you have no idea what you're talking about. You should understand this company and where they're going and what they're doing and how well things are going. And so we had to basically give them an ultimatum and just like, no, we're gonna join. And if you want some portion of this deal, come along with us or we'll just join and then you won't get anything. And it worked out for them in the end.
Yeah. Operators becoming investors. It's there's that thread within you way back when. So Marc, what about you? What was, and you met Brian, you mentioned Brian, which is a massive one. It's hard to overstate the importance of the CEO. What were some of the other things that went through your head of wanting to join, or the reservations, especially being an investor, being in that realm of hearing the pros and cons of the business 8 years?
Yeah.
Was that 8 years ago, 9 years ago?
It was 9 years ago. Yeah. This month, actually 9 years ago is when I joined. So, it's quite a funny story. I decided I wanted to get more operational experience. I was going to go work at a startup and lead the fund, and kind of with an eye of being able to return back to venture. But I just felt I needed to be more in the weeds and be able to revert to experience when I was speaking with founders more. And so I was interviewing with a few companies, some of the big ones at the time: Stripe, Dropbox, Airbnb, a few others. And I remember my first interview with Airbnb, and I won't say who it was. I'll leave him out, but he was exhausted. Like, he looked completely beaten down when we were meeting for our coffee. And I remember just thinking, like, they must be working him to the bone. But he was also very positive. He didn't seem like it was bothering him. He just seemed like he needed a good 3-hour nap or something. And then the next person I met, same, like, very positive, very animated, but just had that look in their eyes that they were exhausted. And the interview process actually took like 4 months. And I would wait 2 or 3 weeks, and then I would get set up for another interview. And I kind of really didn't think it was going to happen. It was quite funny because it was coming up right to Christmas time. And a friend of mine was working in Airbnb at the time. And she said, like, listen, why don't you just come to the Christmas party? And I was like, I don't even know if they're going to offer me a job. Like, I don't know, that would be maybe a bit presumptuous. And she's like, trust me, this is exactly what they would want you to do. And so I showed up to this Christmas party. There was about, 70, 80 people there. And it was, my now wife came with me as well. And I kind of thought, like, there's 1, 2, maybe as 4 people I know here. Like, I'll socialize a little bit. I'll just remind them that I'm still interviewing, and then I'll head home and leave them to it. But they welcomed us in. I think by about 10 o'clock, we knew half the people there. My wife in particular was completely brought under the wing of a number of Airbnb employees who at one point, very late in the evening, she was interviewing with a deflated balloon. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, I find myself in a bar with maybe the last 15 or so Airbnb employees. I haven't been able to leave. It's been too much fun. And Brian sort of turns to me at this point. He goes, so are you going to join? And I remember thinking at the time, like, this is just an incredible collection of people. They're so wholesome and excited and genuinely, clearly buzzing for what they do. And that was a theme that really continued. And, Airbnb wasn't an easy growth path. There were lawsuits, there were doubts, there were, I think people who questioned us, who said we were or we weren't good for cities. And there were plenty of attacks along the way, but that positive attitude, and I think the mentality and the belief in what Airbnb could do, and that it was a good thing, pervaded, and I think I saw that in that Christmas party, and it really confirmed why I wanted to join.
And that invite to the Christmas party, I think, is the classic Airbnb move. I think I think Joe has this like philosophy of get them in the door, and once they're inside, they'll see just how awesome it is here. And I remember that a lot of their execs, they often invite for like a fireside chat first, and then they invite to like a party, and then it's hard to leave. It's hard to give that up. And so they pulled that on you, and it worked out.
And it is so true. It's very infectious. And when you, especially being a startup that was meeting with the team there for a few years as a potential partnership, also Marc's overtures to want to acquire us, there was something that was so intriguing every time you'd go in, and it was the collection of the people. It was, I'm a big believer in how you do anything is how you do everything. And the meticulousness of the office design comes through in the meticulousness of the product. And I don't want this to be a Pollyannish episode of, like I said, of alumni just talking about a company that they worked for. But in my own mental calculus over those, we had 5 years of kind of thinking through, maybe we should join that, it just continued to grow year after year. But I think one of the best ways that I could articulate what I loved about Airbnb was I was chatting with someone there that was maybe a year before we were acquired, and they said, Brian sat me down and I was asking their recruiting path there, and she said that Brian sat me down and he told me that Airbnb had all of the big questions answered and now still had all of the little questions to answer. And I said, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, it has this massive mission that could go on for 100 years. It has this massive network effect that makes it extremely durable, defensible, to where the effort you put in 2017 can still have fruits in 2021. Years later, because of that defensibility. It's founder led, and I'm only recounting the story because I've recounted it 24 times over the last few years, because it was a great framework of what I love and I continue to hold. I'm going to hold after the IPO because of this. And then third, she said that it was founder led, and so the decisions that she knows that are being made today are going to be made tomorrow are the things that are going to be essentially oriented around for the next 30 years. If Brian is the CEO of a company he's founded, for the next 30 years, he's going to make the decisions in that type of time frame versus a professional CEO that maybe vests over 4 years, that plans for 90-day incremental investor calls, quarterly investor calls, that just won't be the internal dialogue or the decision process for a CEO that is going to be there for their life's work. Mm-hmm. And that was so concise, and I was like, damn, yeah, those are 3 really good answers for these big questions. And then the little things, I was like, what do you mean by the little things? She was like, well, we have this issue in Paris, or we have this issue in our product around the payments infrastructure. The printers don't always have paper. I mean, it's all these little things. We don't really have great, at the time, she's saying, we don't really have great ops within the office of just like knowing who is doing what. But I reflected on that for a year, and it just got stronger in my head of why I was so attracted to want to work at somewhere like Airbnb. For the little things can get solved. You can, in many ways, you can build a team around solving for those little things. Those big things, they kind of come once in a generation for companies. Taking a step back, and in the vein of all 3 of us are investors now, would love to use that as a segue to ask you two, what, if you were to invest or not invest into Airbnb at an IPO, what are the things that would attract you to it as investment from that investor lens, just pure financial lens. Well, actually scratch that last point, because I don't think you all invest on a pure financial lens. I think you would look at the culture and the Christmas party, and that would be a determinant of whether you invest. But in that investor lens, how would you slice and dice up Airbnb? And again, just the real honest view from the outside, now that all three of us are outside the four walls, how would you slice it up? Maybe starting with you, Marc.
Yeah, I think there's a few, let's say there's three things that I would probably be looking at that most make me still to this day very bullish on Airbnb's long-term outcome. And I'm sure we'll find ways for me to talk about things that were challenging about working at Airbnb as well. But as I look at the stock now and over the next few years, I think the number one thing is just, and especially demonstrated by this year, is just an absurd resilience to this company. I don't know how many companies in the travel sector, and just going off of the S1 and some of the details that are in it, that might turn a net profit this year. And to have done that, to have had to cut 25% of the staff, and how they did that, I thought was just tremendous execution from Brian and the rest of the executive team there. To come through this, it's very rare, I think, that a stock arrives at IPO and you think this is a resilient stock. Like, usually the things that are on the risk factor page are things that hopefully will never happen, or 5-10 years in the future. And I remember reading that risk factor page because it's published internally, though quite well hidden. And I read it in 2012, and I remember reading, global event that like temporarily reduces or restricts travel, and thinking to myself, yeah, that won't happen. So we've come through one of the larger, more dangerous crises that could affect travel, still standing. So resilience, I think, is absolutely number one. It's a very unusual trait for a tech company coming into their IPO. Another thing I think is just stability. And I know it sounds like resilience. I mean it in a different way, but prior to 2020, Airbnb had been adding $1 billion of revenue every year, almost like clockwork, for the prior 3 years to 2020. And when you look at the retention that they've been able to have amongst guests and hosts, the picture I think you're left with is this kind of just juggernaut. It just keeps on going. And, it kind of goes back to an oft whispered, but, not often said out loud phrase, which is, this is an idea so powerful that I think we can all turn the lights off and go home. And it was something that was said occasionally at Airbnb, kind of tongue in cheek. And truthfully, I don't believe that was the case. But, I think it was just the power of the idea and the structure and dynamics of that idea, how it works, how they sort of reinforce each other. It's both a resilient and incredibly stable business model. So those would be the two reasons I'd be looking long-term at Airbnb.
Yeah. Lenny?
So to echo what you just talked about, I think part of the reason it's so resilient is just the kind of people that Airbnb attracts. Anytime people ask me, and I think most people, if they ask you why, what do you like most about Airbnb? It's almost always people say the people there. And so I think it's been a magnet for just incredibly talented, nice, smart, ego-less people. And I think it'll continue to be that. And I think that's important for it to stay as successful as it has been. So I think that's one part of it, is just kind of the people that continue to work there. The other part is just travel and accommodations. I think it's like a $900 billion market. That's a massive, massive opportunity. And so then if you think about how do you win in that market, especially in a marketplace, you basically have to get people to know you exist in a scalable, efficient way, and then get all the supply that people want to book. And so on the demand side of it, Airbnb is doing this really incredible, rare thing where they're finding ways to drive demand and traffic to the site without spending billions of dollars on Facebook. And if you look at their S1, just in the past, I think just this year, 91% of traffic to Airbnb is organic.
It's crazy.
Basically
crazy.
Just insane.
For listeners, just to underscore that, that is so crazy for a commerce engine it hasn't even gone public yet, where 91% is organic, meaning it's not through ads. That's really crazy.
Exactly. And part of it is it's a little inflated because they turned down paid ads. But if you even look at last year, it was like 85% or something like that. And the bet that they're making, that Brian shared publicly, is they're trying really hard to stop spending money on Facebook and Google ads and bet on direct traffic through launches and PR and things like that. And it seems to be working. And like, booking.com as an example is the complete opposite, where it's all paid growth. And it works for them, but they spend like $5 billion a year on Facebook ads. And that's hard to keep up. And everybody's trying to move to this model of direct traffic. And Airbnb is succeeding at least for now. So I think that's a really rare thing, and it's working for them. And then on the supply side, the way I led supply growth for a couple of years, and the way I always thought about supply at Airbnb was why don't people always book on Airbnb when they're traveling? And to me, the reason is we just don't have the thing they want to stay in. It's as simple as that. If we had the place they wanted to stay on Airbnb, they would always book on Airbnb if the price was the same. And first of all, Airbnb invented this new class of supply of people's homes before anyone else thought about that. And now they're expanding into vacation rentals and boutique hotels and more of the things people want to book. And so if they can nail that, and so far they've been doing a good job, there's basically no reason not to use Airbnb, especially with the demand side of all this free traffic that's coming in. And so I'm super bullish. I think the big question is how much supply is out there, especially home supply, like how many homes can list on Airbnb and will want to. And then as you add more supply, how do you continue to differentiate from, say, Booking or Expedia, where, it's like everything. I think what makes Airbnb unique is it's interesting, unique stuff. And if you add like Marriott and Hilton, you lose a lot of that. So I think they have to find the balance of all the great stuff, but not just become like everybody else.
On that, and this won't be going into any confidential information, but in leading supply growth, that critical factor of this equation, how much supply is there? I don't even think I've ever asked that question internally or with you before. How would you answer that in kind of what is publicly out there of adding boutique hotels, adding vacation rentals and things like that?
I don't know what the numbers are, but on the home side, like the simple way to think about it is how many homes are out there in the world, and then narrow down how many people would put their home up on Airbnb for the amount of money you can make hosting on Airbnb. And then there's like regulation and things like that constrain you as well. So I think the key in most places is just how much do you make and how much hassle it is. It's kind of this ROI decision that a lot of hosts make if they can host. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the numbers are, but I think what's interesting is as more people travel on Airbnb and as you can make more money hosting an Airbnb, more people are incentivized and interested in hosting. And you pay your mortgage hosting an Airbnb. It's one of the most significant and easiest ways to make money in the world, hosting an Airbnb.
Right. And that I think that second part, the hassle question, is this massive question mark in people's minds. But as they have friends that do it, as a neighbor does it and tells them, no, it's no hassle, and I make $1,200 a month or whatever it is. It's I think the money thing, they could get an email to tell them how much money they're going to make, but trying to understand, and the hassle getting less and less over time, which is what I'll talk about in a sec on my calculus, but on the business. But that hassle, I think it becomes less and less of a hassle as you have better and better third-party operators that manage, as people get better and better guidelines on it, as they realize just how much of a hassle it really isn't. To begin with.
The counter to that a little bit that also is worth talking about is as it goes more mainstream, the hassle also goes up because travelers expect a hotel because they're not as like bought into the mission of Airbnb. And so that makes hosting harder. So I think these things balance each other out. Okay. Hosting becomes more mainstream and people learn how to do it and hear from their friends and get better at it. And then, these kind of more hotel seeking travelers don't treat hosts as well, don't treat the place as well. So that adds a little bit more pain.
A good counter.
I think this is the defining question that probably a lot of investors are going to be asking themselves. It's just like, how big is this market we're coming at? And it really is hard to provide an answer to this. But I guess maybe something I've noticed is that, in a lot of ways, this has been the same question for many years, like even since when I joined the company. How many people really are going to want to do this? And before it was sort of like, not, will it be even enough for it to go mainstream? I think it has gone mainstream to a certain extent. And now the question is, how far does it go? And I think people have underrated maybe that potential. And I think one thing they've not looked at is, the founders have always approached this as a very long-term business. 21st century company. They want to see this business last for a very long time. And I think that's reflected in a lot of their actions. But people cycle in and out of hosting. I don't think we've seen the full life cycle of what a host looks like. Before I had children, my wife and I regularly hosted. When we'd host our apartment, we would maybe go off to the country for a few days, or we would do it when we were going back to Ireland. The next time I host, it might be because, I can get in a house that has a spare bedroom or a spare cottage, or maybe it's a vacation home. And I just think this cycle of hosting is really poorly understood still, because, we've only been through 10 years of this company to this point.
Which you can see in the retention cohort data that's in this one, that hosting, they come back, that retention goes down for the first year and then it increases again down the road. So I think that's exactly what happens is people come back because it's just always out there as an option. And also people move. And so, different places that they live in have different ways of hosting.
I'll touch on my internal viewpoint as an investor, and then I want to go deeper on something you just said, Lenny. The way that I look at it, and the reason I'm going to hold, and Mike Moritz from Sequoia is famous for investing and holding. He still has all of his Google stock, apparently, and
wow.
He and that was more or less, it's a testament to when something starts working in the tech, and he'd be much better for holding it versus the market cap when it went public was like 23 billion or something. So that is someone that is investing in the earliest innings of a company that becomes a juggernaut like Google, that just continues to hold. And Mike Maples was the one that told me this. And he said, and I was like, man, he just holds the whole time. And he said, yeah, his view is once these things start working, it takes a lot for them to start to break apart. That these power laws, they just get better and better and better, specifically if the business has network effects. And Mike said, there's real wisdom in that. But I don't think Mike Maples, not Mike Moritz, I don't think Mike Maples holds, but he was just telling me that about Mike Moritz. And Airbnb is one of those businesses where I get really excited to tell potential investors about it, because it's one of these things that not only is it working and like clockwork, is adding $1 billion in revenue every year, but it also is still just beginning for what my parents have never stayed in Airbnb yet. I remember like 6 years ago, before my parents used Amazon, I was like, maybe it was 2012. I remember thinking, shit, Amazon is going to be massive. My parents, a massive consumer class, isn't even using it yet because they still want to go to the store. Yeah. And my parents love vacations, love traveling. Their whole generation, or their friends, I don't know about their whole generation, but their friends don't really use Airbnb yet. Even my oldest sibling, who's 47, he doesn't really use Airbnb yet. And using it as a family, it's like a dream to use it as a family when you got little ones running around. You don't want hotel rooms, and you want to be able to just really relax in the place you're visiting. It's perfect for him, and he has a brother that worked there. He still doesn't really use it, but 5 years from now will. My parents 5 years from now will, and so I look at it's working, and it's still just beginning as kind of this as the first articulation of why I'm bullish on it. Second is the network effects of the business. Like, this isn't like Zoom. This isn't even like Uber, which has weak form network effects. And if you're an investor in tech, it's part of me thinks that Silicon Valley talks about network effects too much, and then 50% of me is like, good God, we should be talking about it every day, every minute of every day, because it is such an insanely powerful force of what makes something like Google or Facebook, and the network effects behind Airbnb. Lenny, Marc, I think you were joking that you could turn the lights off and it would just continue to grow. And yeah, it's said in jest, but it really adds to that resiliency and that stability. What were you going to say?
I think that's a point that people do overlook quite a bit, and it's really, I think it's kind of hard to understand. And even when I've spoken with other investors, and Uber's a good contrast, phenomenal company, obviously a service that we all use a lot. But if they, when they were scaling, if they were to open up a new market, there's essentially no crossover of users. Like maybe occasionally I've used an Uber in another city to the city where I'm primarily based, but it doesn't happen very often. And yet Airbnb is, especially considering how much of our travel was international travel, where travelers going back to their home countries. And this is maybe one of the most conversational things that they will have done all year, especially in the early days. I went and stayed in a loft and I found it online and it had like a shark head on the wall or whatever it might have been. It became this really conversational piece and part of your year, as vacations tend to be, but with an added bit of, I think, spice to it. And from those conversations, that person might not become a host. They were a guest originally, but they might not become a host. But by saying this to people, there's 20 people who hear this, and one of them, the light bulb goes off, and they go, I could save some money. This would be really great for me. I'm going to do it. And so, Brian said this a few times to me. We were international before we really meant to be. And we didn't have a playbook initially for international expansion. It just happened. And it was because of the nature of travel and that people are crossing large traverses. And this is important. The second part of this network effect piece is that as a travel business, the expectation is I come to you and I can book something anywhere. And booking has really set this expectation. Expedia obviously set it as well, and Kayak. And the expectation is if I'm looking for a place in Paris or Tokyo or London or wherever, I should be able to find it on this website. And being able to do that allows you to develop this organic traffic. And it's about a lot of other things. It's about brand. It's about the experience and the quality and all of this stuff. But those are the elements that I think were really, really underpin what you mean when you say network effects.
Right. And for listeners to explain it a little bit further, it's imagine a product that gets a network effect. You can think about it if a product gets better because it has 1 million more users. The actual your product, your app on your phone gets better if they have 1 million more users, which is that's a crazy concept. My Nikes don't get better with 1 million more customers.
I think it's true even just like one user. That's even a simpler way to think about it. Like if one additional unit of supply joins, is it more useful to the demand? And with homes, absolutely. With cars, absolutely.
True. One more, I think with from a very layman's perspective, just 1 million more homes, you're like, oh God, it's so much better. Then yes, you work that back, and it's like it means that it's incrementally better with one more, or 1 million more people booking because you're hosting. Then you work that back, and incrementally one makes it better for you as well. And that is such a our matcha Kari, dude. I need to get a promo code and affiliate link from them. That our tea does not get better because 1 million more people are drinking it. That is such a crazy concept for a product to get better with more people using it. You don't have to improve the product from a line of code perspective, from a marketing perspective. It's just boom, the same app that you downloaded on the phone a month ago now is more valuable. That Zoom doesn't get more valuable as we're using it with 1 million more people using it. Uber has weak form network effects, meaning that I could switch between Uber and Lyft really easily. It's very difficult for me to just, if I am hosting on Airbnb and it has a much more robust customer segment, just to switch to someone else, I'm going to be very unlikely to do that. As a driver, drivers are driving for both. And they'll drive for the third option if there's another option that's offering something even more appealing. They'll easily just switch. As a host, it would be a lot for me to try to switch from Airbnb to another platform, even if they offered some temporary bonus. What were you going to say, Lenny?
Yeah, just to kind of double down on what you guys are saying, I'd say the thing that's most unique about Airbnb's network effect is its geographic network effect, which is really rare and very hard to build up. But once you've got it going, it's a massive moat. So for example, the examples you guys used of like Uber in like, say, LA, if you build up cars and riders in LA, great, you've done that. And now it's hard to compete in LA, but now someone could launch in San Francisco and beat you. With Airbnb, like if you think about it, to make Airbnb useful, you have to have critical mass where they're coming from, say San Francisco, and then where they're going, Tokyo, and for every possible combination of cities.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I think of Airbnb's massive moat, is the geographic network effect, where you have to win in every city on both sides of the marketplace. And right. I think that's part of the reason it took them so long to get going. I think there was like 2 or 3 years initially of just very flat growth where nothing was
going to say, it sounds so good at the end.
Exactly.
Right. It's 12 years in, it sounds good. Right.
Like they genuinely spent 2 years essentially trying to like make kindling start in the rain. And there's a lot of stories that are told about, when Paul Graham, who's one of the founders of Y Combinator, told them, go to where your users are. And they spent that summer in New York, essentially just meeting and talking with users. And each time they would show up at another house, they would, have something else figured out that was now part of the Airbnb service, whether it was professional photography or helping you with your listing description or helping you figure out how to evaluate guests. And it's an amazingly difficult path to start on. And we come back to the people, and Lenny, you touched on it. I mentioned it, I think, as well. But like to have the perseverance to get through those 2 years, I think it takes a very special collective, a very balanced group of people just to get to that point. And mostly on their own, just the three of them really for those first 2 years.
And amen. It's for founders listening to this that maybe are in the midst of the trough of sorrows of, after the excitement of launch, and you're in those 2 years. This momentous occasion of an IPO is only possible because, and really just what the company has already been building that is so special, and what it will build was on the other side of 2 years, 3 different launches. That beginning part of the story, it gets so glossed over, and that's part of the inspiration of this podcast, is to go below the line of what the typical narrative of a company is. And so it's only appropriate to mention how, even though it's not the point of this episode, to mention how arduous that initial few years were, and 3 different launches of the company before it really started to be quote unquote live and a product that people could use. So if you're in those depths as a founder listening, know that it actually just more of what you're doing could be the secret. And Airbnb is certainly a testament to investing more when it wasn't working rather than shying away, like going to New York for an entire summer.
Yeah, I'd say if you're a founder, Google 7 rejections, Brian Chesky, and you'll find a blog post he wrote where he shares emails from, I think, 7 of the best VCs in the Valley when he was raising money, and how they rejected Airbnb over and over and over.
That's awesome.
I think Paul Graham, I think he's famous for saying how, like, this is the craziest idea I've ever heard. No one's going to stay in strangers' homes. What the hell are you guys trying to do?
Right.
And I think he only invested because he just believed in the founders, and they're just like super scrappy and gritty.
Yeah.
He described them as cockroaches.
Yeah.
That they would survive a nuclear blast. And genuinely, like, it sounds like when you retell the story that there was a lot of fortune involved, that, one fortuitous event or idea, ideas are lucky in their own right. They have to work, or they have to be well-timed, or whatever it might be. But what you end up missing is like Lenny just mentioned, the 7 rejections. Like there are all these negative, challenging points that they hit at different stages along the way. They were severely in debt at one point and sold cereal to make their way out of it.
They had a binder of credit cards that they were funding the company on, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I think it sounds a lot rosier in its retelling, but it was tough.
Below the Line is brought to you by a little project of mine called Magic Mind. It is it's the world's first productivity shot. It's a 2-ounce shot of 12 magical ingredients that I started to put together in my own kitchen about 6 years ago. And 6 years, over 100 iterations later, I give you the world's greatest morning ritual drink. And I stand by that. If you go check out magicmind.co, you can see the reviews on the site. You can see what people are saying pretty much every day on Twitter. Just search for @magicmind. It is a matcha-based little energy shot that gives you 6 to 7 hours of creative flow. And I'm easily 40 to 50% more productive every day that I take it. So check it out, magicmind.co. Enter promo code BTL for Below the Line for 15% off. That's BTL at magicmind.co for 15% off. Below the Line is also brought to you by Tiny Capital. Selling your business is a miserable task. I speak from experience when I say that. Months of negotiation, legal fees, and you get to watch the new owners trash the business that you built over several years in a matter of months sometimes. Tiny started to become the buyer everybody wished existed when they were selling their online business. It is the dream buyer scenario. Fair, fast, and founder-friendly. If you're looking for a new home for your internet business, they will respond in a day or two, make an offer in 7 days, and close within 30 days. That is unheard of anywhere in the world of acquisitions, and they've done it several times now. Some of my friends have sold to Tiny Capital, and like I said, it's the dream scenario. Get in touch at tinycapital.com. Tiny partners with founders to give them quick, straightforward exits that protect their team and culture. They'll make an offer within a week, close the deal within a month, and keep your business operating for the long term. It's tinycapital.com. Below the Line is also brought to you by TechMeme. When the New Yorker magazine asked Mark Zuckerberg how he gets his news, he said the one news source he definitely follows is TechMeme. I do as well. I love it. And for 3 years and nearly 800 episodes, the TechMeme Ride Home news podcast has been Silicon Valley's favorite tech news podcast. Any and all tech news that's happening in the day, you can find it on the TechMeme Ride Home. It's a daily podcast, only 15 to 20 minutes long, and every day it is done and out there by 5 p.m. Eastern, and it is all the latest tech news. But it's more than just headlines. You could get a robot to read you headlines. The TechMeme Ride Home is all the context around the latest news of the day as well. It's all the top stories, the top posts and tweets, and conversations about those stories, as well as the behind-the-scenes analysis that TechMeme provides. The TechMeme Ride Home is like the TLDR as a service for tech news for that day. The folks at TechMeme are online all day, every day, reading everything so they can catch you up. So listen to the one tech news podcast anyone who's anyone in Silicon Valley listens to every day. Search your podcast app now for Ride Home and subscribe to the TechMeme Ride Home podcast. Speaking of subscribe, to use the parlance of YouTube, smash the hell out of the subscribe button on your whatever. You might be on podcast player, you might be on Spotify, but subscribe to Below the Line. And now, since we're doing videos on YouTube, I want you to take a gallon of gasoline and pour it over the subscribe button. And I want you to light that baby on fire. And then I want you to smash it when it's on fire with some type of medieval weapon until you are subscribed. And that's what I'm told is required to subscribe to a channel on YouTube. In any case, we are also going to be doing a lot more videos. So not just these few that have just been uploaded in the last few weeks. We're going to be doing more and more videos with every single episode, as well as clips within each episode. So you're going to want to subscribe. Subscribe to Below the Line on YouTube or your favorite podcast app today. And it was tough. We'll get to this next. It's a good segue to our time there and the challenges we saw within the walls and the challenges that we see outside the walls. But the third aspect of after the network effect, and the founders didn't know what a network effect was when they started too. So there is true, absolute truth to there's good fortune. The idea had a robustness on the other side of it. But the third aspect is, and by the way, in that network effect realm, I think it is one of, we mentioned it, but I think it's one of the strongest network effects of any business online. The third aspect is founder-led is Brian. So you mentioned it, Marc, your first meeting with Brian. One of the biggest reasons, top 3 reasons that I'm so bullish on the company is it goes back to Brian. Working alongside him for 2 years every day, I was already impressed from the outside and getting to know him, and he mentored us as fellow founders before joining the company. But holy shit. And this is not like, there isn't universal just love for the CEO at a company you work at, any company, but knowing what founders look like, knowing how rare great founders are, knowing the intensity in which you're operating as a CEO every damn day on a much smaller scale with Tilt and 100 employees. I can't imagine with 5,000. That is, and then seeing the grace in which that person can operate and the thoughtfulness that person can operate within all of that intensity just made me more and more of a fan. I would say he's a 10 out of 10 founder to work alongside or to invest in, and it's for a few reasons. Well, the first thing is just as a company that is you're looking at to potentially invest in. I already mentioned a founder-led company. They're going to be thinking 30 years out, 10 years out. They're going to be there 10 years out. So they're going to be thinking 10 years out versus a professional CEO that is potentially managing on a quarterly basis for these very important investor calls. The second part of that founder-led company, that aspect that makes it really intriguing to invest in, is that they have the moral authority to make decisions on the fly. They not only have the institutional knowledge, obviously, because they were there since the beginning, they also have the institutional knowledge of who does what, because they've been there from the beginning. But they also have the moral authority to make a decision very quickly, especially if a global pandemic happens. Things that could rock a company. If you have a professional CEO, it might take them 10 months to get the 24 people to buy in to this new plan, or this shift in plan, the 8 board members, the 25 other execs. That makes them very slow. They basically have, even if they know what path they need to take forward, they've got 2 hands tied behind their back because they realize, all right, it's going to be 8 months of selling to make this, because I don't have the moral authority. I've only been here a year, whatnot. And Brian can make a choice, overnight, and it's always done very thoughtfully, but can make a choice with the drop of a hat for a brand new territory the company's in with a new product or a global pandemic, whatever it is. And so that's the second part of that moral, or the founder-led, the appeal of a founder-led company. And then him just as the individual founder is such a bold, aggressive and thoughtful, which is very, rare combination. He could be bold and aggressive, but not thoughtful. But he's all 3 of those things. And that's, all of these are rare, but that combination, it's very hard as an investor. I rarely see that, with angel investments, with, Series A's. I imagine what y'all would say, but what would, how would Brian compare to the founder CEOs that you two are meeting with, on a daily, weekly basis, for startup founders?
I think I'll go in a different direction. I think it's important to highlight the other 2 founders too, in addition to Brian. I remember a story where they were working, I think, with an executive coach, and they did like a personality test of some sort. Mm-hmm. And the results were that they were the most varied / perfect combination of founders at a company, because they had like the perfect collection of all the skills you need. And so I think Brian is really, really important, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. But I think Joe and Nate were actually really pivotal to the success as well, and still continue to be. And I think that's part of it. I think it's Brian, but I think it's Joe and Nate. They're being there as well. That's been the root of a lot of the success.
I couldn't agree more from the what will be accomplished, what has been accomplished perspective. I call out Brian, or the CEO specifically, for just the hands in which the chief executive, the hands in
Absolutely.
which are going to guide the direction of the company as a public company, or for the next umpteen years. But yeah, I think it is. I was also thinking about the breakdown between them, and you have Nate focusing on this international expansion in territory like China. That is very hard to do. You need a founder doing that, or else you'll I think churn through multiple executives that can't get it done, or don't have the resolve that a founder does, like we said with those first 2 years. And then you have Joe thinking through 3 years plus out, 5 years plus out, and having that founder perspective for the next layers of what the Airbnb ecosystem can become. And so it's a great division of labor between them.
Lenny, I think that's really important and often overlooked as well. And one important fact that is kind of needs to be understood is that the founders had this policy called core values. I don't know if it was always called core values, but essentially, they wanted to meet every employee that came in the building. And up to the first, I think 500, 600 employees, one, or in my case, all three founders interviewed every single person that came in the door. And why is this kind of interesting? Well, they were three very polar opposites in aspects to their personality. And I think what ended up happening is, there wasn't a founder that you would really dislike necessarily for any reason, although, like, listen, you're building this big crazy startup. There are things that don't go your way. There are challenging moments that you have with people across the board. But there were a lot of different personality types in the building, and they could find their kind of idol or their mentor in one of the three of them. And that was enough to really feel safe and like you belonged in the building. Maybe you were a bit more analytical or a bit more creative or a bit more hard charging. Depending on which one, you could find someone to look up to that showed you belonged. And that I think is
cool
often
point. Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
I've asked myself several times, if the three of them weren't there, would Airbnb have been as successful? And it's impossible to answer. But I really do think that it was this sort of combination that made it such a great place to work ultimately for all the people who ended up joining.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't when you call it out like that. It's and Lenny slicing up the different personality types. But that's such an interesting. Yeah, if you have founders that are super alike, then it's very hard for a diverse set of people to identify themselves with different mindsets, or that with to find a mindset that aligns with theirs, and they do provide that. That's very cool.
And you said earlier,
okay.
What are your reservations about, maybe what were your reservations? And my biggest reservation for sure was every time I'd walked in the building, I felt like I was surrounded by absurdly outspoken, confident people. And that was what was almost intimidating for me because it felt so unusual. Usually people would be quite reserved. You'd have the elevator chat, etc. And it didn't really feel like that when you were in the building. People were very quick to speak their minds, and that was genuinely the thing that intimidated me most about joining the company almost.
But they're also very nice. I think that was a common thread. The other thing I was going to say is it's also incredible all three founders are still there. Like, they started this little company 12 years ago, like I don't think they expected to be running a whatever $30 billion corporation of thousands of people. And the fact that they're still around and not super burnt out or tired or bored says a lot, and I'm excited to see
or just interested in other things because they feel like, all right, we've done enough, and now I get to go play in some other sandbox, but they choose to be there. Yeah, that is very right. I don't think, I know most of the founders of Facebook weren't there when it went public. So it's a great, I'm going to stop saying the word segue, I swear. Never said it so much, but there were so many areas that I wanted to make sure we covered with this conversation. Great scooters. And actually, they're terrible. Okay, so within that reservation bucket, if you were an investor looking in today for the size that it's at, Lenny, you touched on supply growth. Is there still growth opportunity there? What would your reservations be? And I'm sure you all hear this from people. I know when people ask me if I'm going to sell or not, and I tell them no, I'm holding, then I have to push back on a battery of questions. What are your reservations on the business, and what challenges do you think are on the horizon? Big challenges do you think are on the horizon for the business in this next chapter as a public company?
Yeah, so supply growth, especially on the home side. There's plenty of hotel supply, and the question is how much more home supply can they continue adding, and how do they find that balance between this is unique, interesting, local experience while having all the things that people want to book, and kind of continuing to find that balance. I think is going to be challenging, but they've done it really well so far. I think maintaining this direct traffic advantage that they have over competitors is a risk. Like, how long can they keep it up? Because eventually the drug of Facebook ads and Google ads is hard to pass up, and then you get stuck driving growth through paid. So I think there's that. There's regulation continues to be a challenge for Airbnb, but I think the good news is basically, I don't know, every city at this point has kind of figured out at least what they want to do regulation wise to start, and so it's less uncertain. And now it's just a matter of the details of how cities are going to manage Airbnb. And then I think there's a question of what's the next business unit that Airbnb launches that's going to be meaningfully impactful on the bottom line. Experience is kind of the first big bet. And I think for it to continue growing, they got to find something else that adds significant revenue. So I'm curious to see where that goes. And there's a lot of good ideas, but nothing's clicked yet, other than experiences, which I don't know exactly how it's doing.
Yeah. Marc?
Yeah, I think Lenny probably hit all of them there. I would agree that, I'm very bullish on experiences. I think to see another revenue line come in would just be a really powerful string to Airbnb's bow and show that there's potential for them to start and be successful in launching more businesses in the future. And, that's something I'd certainly love to see as an investor over the next few years. And I know the company's really committed to making it happen as well. And, for the few experiences that I have jumped in on, they're awesome. And a couple of them really, I think, were standout moments of this year, where all of a sudden finding something unique to do was quite challenging, especially as a parent of two small kids. So I think that's one important factor. I think the regulatory side has maybe become less challenging for another dynamic as well. And it's just as the company has scaled, each individual city has less of a hold over the whole business as back in 2013, 2014. But for me, the main thing that I'm thinking about is just watching this company come out of what has been a really taxing year, taxing on the business numbers, but taxing on the employee base, those who are left behind. I think there's a chance to build anew now and to maybe solidify or cement some of the things that made it a good place. But it's for sure, it's taken a huge toll, I think, on anyone who worked there.
Yeah, I think I debated in my mind whether to mention some of these things that I think are that I don't have fully articulated thoughts on, but the whole purpose of the podcast is exploring these under discussed things, and so I'll mention them. The first one is, I think that when I first joined, I remember feeling like the the company would benefit from a crisis. Competitor.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
Really? Yeah. It's so I remember just in the first few weeks going from just a business that was always on the brink of life or death, life or death, life or death. We were there in the office till 9 p.m., 10 p.m. Too much so, and it wasn't healthy. But then going into Airbnb and feeling like, okay, there's, people are kind of leaving at 5 p.m., 6 p.m. We're still in, which is healthy. This is just my perspective back then. But there was this sense of, all right, this thing is so durable, and we can kind of take our foot off the gas. And I remember thinking, I thought that at the time it would be like Google or booking just becoming more of a competitive threat. But I felt like it would benefit from a crisis of just shaking everybody to realize nothing is certain, and every company needs to continue to stay as aggressive as I know the founders wanted the company to be, but you get 5 or 6 degrees away from that founder energy, and people are leaving at 4. So there's that I felt like the pandemic was really interesting to see how the company was going to respond to it. And I only put it together maybe 2 months ago. So 8 months into the pandemic, I was like, oh, that's the crisis that probably instilled a little bit of the real uncertainty of building a company. And no matter how lauded you become as a company from those around you, there still is no guarantee there is a tomorrow. The other thing that I thought about with the pandemic, I want to get y'all's opinion on it, is that it is the most unwanted potential positive thing that could happen to a company like Airbnb. And this is just my perspective as a investor. Just if I'm looking at whether I'm gonna hold or not. And the reason I say that is because, and please disagree with this if you don't follow the thinking, but my viewpoint is, I don't know the numbers. I don't know the hospitality space, accommodation space around the world, but I imagine 20 to 30%, maybe 40% of accommodations around the world will go out of business because of this pandemic. Not many are going to have this cash in the bank that, billions of dollars in the bank that Airbnb has to ride it through. And so I don't know what Airbnb's their market percentage is, 4% or something, but I think it's going to go up by 50%, maybe 2x when this is all said and done, just by the nature of they can survive and others can't. This is not an emotional qualification of how tough this year has been for the company, which is nothing compared to the extreme intensity this year has been on all of us and those affected by the health crisis of the pandemic. But from an investor standpoint, which is the point of this episode, that's a crazy black swan that could have, like, in my head 8 months ago, 9 months ago, I was like, God, this sucks so bad. This is the worst black swan event that could possibly happen to Airbnb. To now on the other side, or at least 9 months in, I'm kind of thinking this is a really interesting potential undesirable positive event for a resilient company like Airbnb that has been investing in that resiliency for 12 years to be in that position. Sorry, there was so many words. I just wanted to cover all the different 360 degrees of that crazy statement, that it's an undesirable positive event for Airbnb. But I'm going to open it up to what you all think of that take.
I'd say the other really surprising positive result is when COVID hit. It was very unclear what's going to come back first, hotels or homes. because you could argue people don't want to stay with other people when there's a pandemic, and they're going to be afraid of traveling in Airbnb, and hotels are going to kind of wipe out the idea of the Airbnb way of traveling. And it turned out to be the complete opposite. And people are coming back to homes much more than hotels because they worry about lobbies and, concierge and all that. So that's another surprising benefit of this whole thing, which I didn't see coming. Yeah. And then part of the reason the business has done well recently is not only are people traveling domestically more than they used to, but they're staying at longer and they're staying at nicer places because they want to be safer. Mm-hmm. And so that's growing revenue a lot more than I think people expected. So even though if absolute bookings are down, revenue is actually up because of that. And I think if you look at the average order, the average daily rate of trips, it's gone up like 20% year over year, which I think is for the first time it's ever gone up really. And I imagine it'll stick around at least in some form where people just travel and stay in nicer places, which just increases revenue per stay, which is really promising.
Yeah, another aspect of that uniqueness is that business travel, I think, is going to be affected for the next 3 years, maybe ad infinitum, because Zoom has now woken everybody up to the fact that you can accomplish a lot remotely, but business travel is a small portion of Airbnb's business, and for hotels and airlines, the other pillars of travel, it's a massive part of their business that might be affected for years to come.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. Like crises, in a cold way of looking at them, mean opportunity. I think of the quote from Game of Thrones: "Chaos is a ladder," and
who was that? Littlefinger or
Littlefinger? I've always loved that line, and you can actually really trace a long history of the crises at Airbnb and what they meant, and you can probably do that with a lot of startups that go, from startup to growth stage company, mature company. But, whether it was going into debt and needing to sell cereal boxes, or whether it was the New York AG subpoenaing us to hand over user data, or, in all of these moments where I think our business were affected, it's been a rallying call, it's been a motivational tool, and it's brought people inside the business ultimately closer together. And I don't think it's a bad thing that it does that. You still have to be able to stand up and be in the position to make the best of the crises. And ultimately, I think that's what we're coming back to when we're talking about perseverance earlier, and just this resilience of the business and how that traces to their founders. Like just being able to stand up in times like this. And obviously a lot of actions were taken as well. There was a lot of navigating that was required, but just being able to stand up is really important.
Yeah. And resilience. Yeah. That is not a fleeting decision in time. That's an investment that a company makes years and years and years before some pivotal moment happens. On the risks of the business, I think and challenges, I think the biggest ones you all have named, I agree with them. The supply of homes and the growth in supply that goes beyond homes now with boutique hotels, and then expansion into new innovative verticals, new innovative business lines. And my viewpoints on both of those, the first of which, hot Twitter opinion, but I think Airbnb 10 years from now was going to have every hotel around the world on it in some type of inventory search way. And it might not be the core product, and it might not be part of the fabric of what makes Airbnb special, but at least is on there so that it really can be Amazon-esque of having more supply than anyone else. They have the chance to have more supply than anyone else if they add that, but it just might be another decade before it makes sense within the fabric of the company. But I do think that is where it's going. And I think in terms of supply and in general, I think there's like I was saying, I think there's just so many people that are waiting to hear vicariously through neighbors, friends, and others how much of a hassle it is or isn't. Because I think in people's heads, they believe it's a massive, massive hassle. I know that was my case even the night before signing the docs to join. And then it ended up being not that big of a hassle. But I know my parents, it's going to be 7 years of education before they consider, hosting. And then I bet they would love it. And it won't come from their son. It'll come from, their friends doing it. And then they, get that social proof from there. But on the innovation, I think that's a massive one. A massive challenge or proof point that is yet to be revealed, that they can invest in multiple new areas that's what takes it from, 2-dimensional exponential growth curve to 3-dimensional, just unstoppable Amazon-esque type of business. But Amazon, who's proven to be the best, this is my, response to that angle of questioning, is Amazon, who's proven to be the best tech juggernaut at innovation. It took them 13 years before they started to have a second business line that was of any significance with AWS. They had tried Amazon auctions. They launched in 94. They tried Amazon auctions in 97. Massive failure 4 or 5 years later. But then Amazon auctions became the infrastructure for Amazon marketplaces, which now is, I think, 30% of the revenue. But that's taken, an additional 15 years to get to that point. But Amazon Web Services, totally orthogonal to selling things, is arguably maybe the strongest part of their business, and that came in, I think, 2007. So it'd be 13 years in. So I think that what most from the outside or from the inside don't truly understand is how friggin' hard it is to innovate in new business categories as a large company or as a new company. We all know we know the track record of success for startups, but especially a large company. And I just think it takes a couple iterations before they start to get the DNA of, okay, this is how we do it, or this is how we should do it. Experiences, I think, is a great first attempt, but it also took a few years before it started to click. And people wrote it off in the beginning because it wasn't clicking. So that's my view on that innovation category. Is it ultimately comes down to leadership commitment, not success rate. And the leadership couldn't be more committed, in my view, as founders to continue to innovate. And
maybe that's been one of the challenges. Like the leadership has turned over at times outside of the founders, but the executive team has changed a few times. And as it did for Facebook, I think they turned over their executive team multiple times on the way to IPO. There's just sort of a kind of a figuring out phase of how you want the business to be run. And I think we've always been very intentional. Or I say we, it's still a weekness, but Airbnb has always been
That's
very
the strength of the company right there. If employees years later are saying we.
And it's been 2.5 years since I worked there, but they've always been very intentional about what kind of organizational structure they want to set up and how do they want to execute. We've oscillated between more operational, more I think brand and vision led, and none of those worked out perfectly each time, but each time you sort of whittle a few things that you do like about how you're running the company and a few things that you don't, and it hardens over time. And I think that's a stage of Airbnb that I'm excited to see more of, this kind of stability inside the company in terms of this leadership group.
And I think touching on your point that you made about focus and the crisis creating opportunity. Airbnb has always oscillated between these two modes of, okay, let's just focus and do one thing really well, and let's try to do a bunch of different stuff and see what other seeds kind of sprout into new opportunities. And it kind of goes back and forth. And this pandemic, and then even I think going public forced Airbnb to cut off stuff that they've been experimenting with and trying to focus on the core business again. And I'm curious to see if that is good or bad, and then what happens with these additional experiments, like stuff they've shared publicly, like transportation and this like Airbnb studio business and things like that. Yeah. So yeah, that's the other maybe benefit, maybe downside. I don't know what the right answer is with these other ideas.
Well, time will tell. Our prognostications aside, time will tell. Well, what are y'all's parting words on the on this moment in time on Airbnb for this episode? And this will be my penultimate question. The last, I'll save my last question for last. But what are your parting thoughts on this whole topic of whether to invest if you've never invested, or just this new phase that Airbnb is about to enter? I'll start with you, Marc.
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of emotions. You know, I've been involved with the company for 10 years, and I've been talking with a lot of colleagues, obviously coming up to this moment, and you know, it's funny. I think if I was to describe the mood, it was sort of a mixture of thankfulness and regret at the same time. And I think it's regret because it was such a positive time in a lot of people's lives. It was such a special time. It's a hard time, I think, for any of us to ever really recreate. And you know, we were younger then. There were things that, you know, of course you look back on, you might have done differently, but things also that you look back on and you just can't believe that they actually happened and that you got to be a part of them. So first off, I think I want to just express my thankfulness and to the people I got to work with and for my time there. In terms of, you know, the future going forward, you know, I want to wish the company the best of luck with it. And obviously, if you are an investor, please buy the stock.
Right. Lenny?
What I often think about is when friends leave Airbnb and join other companies, you often hear like, man, it's not like Airbnb. They don't have the same culture. They don't have the same kind of, I don't know, mission. Mm-hmm. And I think that says a lot about what Airbnb's created and what continues to create. I'm super fortunate to have been a part of this journey. Like when I remember joining the first team meeting after our company joined, I saw like the Airbnb logo on the back of the stage. I was like, how did I end up at Airbnb? This is not where I saw my path going. And looking back, that was such a great decision and such a fortunate place to be in. And I think it's important to highlight there's like, 5,000 people that have been a part of Airbnb and responsible for the success it's seen and where it is now. And we're just like a tiny, insignificant portion of it. And I'm super thankful to have been part of that.
Yeah, I would get toast in Cairo, the Cafe Cairo. And for some reason, no one else, not many people would venture to Cairo as their cafe of choice. But I would get toast there and just kind of sit there, and maybe there'd be one or two other people in there, and it was awesome. Just the homemade peanut butter and
kombucha,
and kombucha on tap. Even though I hate kombucha, but I was good. I was happy to know it was there on tap, but I would be eating the toast every day at 4 p.m. and I would just be like, man, how did I get here? This is so cool. And as a founder, I remember when my team was like, man, you're going to be there. Like, you're going to want to leave the second you're there. You're just meant to be a founder. You're meant to be CEO. And
same.
When they said that, I was actually like, no, there's nothing I want more than to not be a CEO for a long time. So they did. When they said that to me, I was like, there's no way. But 8 months in, a year in, I was like, even 2 years in, when I left to angel invest full time, I was like, is this a huge mistake? I'm so fortunate to have this as a place to work. So I remember that really well as well, Lenny. My parting thoughts are maybe just that. It's every day for 2 years, even when leaving, thinking, God, I'm so lucky to have this, and is this a big mistake? Most people, I think, run away from a lot of jobs, and they can't wait to leave or go towards something that they've told themselves in their head is going to be better. But it's really cool to be at a place where you say the opposite each day. Does the last question for you two is, and for all three of us, everyone's in a different life stage, so they need to sell some for life reasons. But imagine I were to give you $100,000 that you can invest anywhere the day of the IPO publicly. Would you, and where and how much would you invest that into, or where would you invest that in the whole market? Actually, it's an open-ended question. And how much of that would you invest in Airbnb?
Wait, the question is, okay, we have 100K and we can invest it in anything.
Any public stock.
How much of that would go into Airbnb?
Yeah, any public stock the day of the IPO.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, and I want the super honest opinion. It is. We've already professed our love for Airbnb already in the episode, so you can say whatever you want.
My first take hearing that was, well, I hope they get a good diversified portfolio.
Right.
Invest this money for the long term, and they're not thinking about quick hits and quick wins.
All Bitcoin.
And then I went to, thinking about the multiple times I've heard VCs say, invest in yourself actually first, and then you can build your portfolio of stocks. So I think if I had to buy a basket of equities that are only launching in the last few months and next few months, I absolutely think Airbnb belongs to be a pretty big chunk of that portfolio. It's just had a really tough year and has in prior years done much larger revenue streams than it will do this year. And so in that immediate term, there's a lot of growth potential for the company. And if you make me put a number on it, I might say 100,000, because if I look at the other stocks that are going public this year, they're actually really more on a wave that was driven by COVID. Not on a year where they got torched by COVID. It's actually been really, from a business perspective, it's been extraordinarily beneficial to technologies that either allow you to work remote or allow you to communicate better remotely, or a number of tools that have made this possible, our continued existence through all of this possible. And Airbnb has survived in spite of it. So that would be I'd put the whole thing on Airbnb.
I don't know if I would put it all on Airbnb. I think what gets me excited, we talked about all the things, but I think just travel is a massive opportunity. And if you look at Airbnb's valuation versus even Booking, I think even when it's going, like the numbers people are talking about for going public, it's significantly lower. And I think there's a lot more upside that people haven't seen. But I don't know. I'd say, let's say a third on Airbnb, and then, I don't know, buy some DoorDash, buy some Twilio. And I don't know, maybe Shopify.
Really, that's a side little insight for folks, is where Lenny would spread his money. Those are all good companies. I think I'm not. What's the phrase? I am not bullshitting, I guess, is what I wanted to say. I was trying to think of the non-curse word version, but I'm a Texan, so own it. I'm not bullshitting when I say 100. I'd put 100% of it in Airbnb, and that is not to try to just encourage people to invest, because and that's the obvious major disclosure is we're all major stockholders, so we would want that for that selfish reason. But the true disconnected, detached from the stock ownership that I have, there's a reason that I angled so hard to end up at Airbnb. So I've made that decision before for this stock over other valuable stock. But I would put, and I'm going to hold forever, life design wise, as long as I can, because of the things that we chatted about on this episode. And it's what makes me so excited whenever I'm asked about the business or the fundamentals or whether people are going to invest in the IPO or should, because it's such, if you add up everything that we've said, and then you tick those boxes for Airbnb, and you look for another business over the last 10 years that it ticks all of those boxes, there isn't one. I mean, not even Uber ticks all of those boxes, especially when we talk about something like, global network effects, which is not like, it's not like just one of the check boxes. It's one of the massive ones that you would look for as an investor. And so, all of these things, those check boxes, you don't check them with really any other. I love Shopify as a business, as a product, as a user. I love Zoom. We're using it right now. But when you get into that defensibility, and some of the other things we chatted about today, it's pretty incredible. And yes, turning a profit in probably the most black swan, negatively impacting event and year that a company could deal with. Pretty, that speaks volumes to the type of business, any tech business going public with that type of profile, much less one going through that or having that profile in such a interesting black swan type of year. So that's my take. All right. Well, Lenny, Marc, thank you so much. Where can listeners find you all online?
I'm at
McCabe. Oh, you go there.
Oh, you go. No, you go. No, you go.
At McCabe on Twitter is where you'll find me.
All right.
At Lenny San, SAN on Gmail, not Gmail, on Twitter.
Well, everybody, you can find Lenny and Marc online, and they're part of the Airbnb diaspora, the Airbnb mafia that are investing in amazing businesses around the globe, especially ones that leverage their experience from Airbnb. And listeners, thank you for tuning in to this deep dive on the Airbnb IPO. Good luck to everybody that is a stockholder or that has any type of vested interest. Good luck to the entire employee base, the team, and everybody, all the family members of the team members that have been working so hard over the last 12 years. And congrats for a momentous occasion, one that we should all be drinking beer even at 10 a.m. in the morning, Lenny.
Or matcha.
Yeah, or matcha. All right, guys. Thanks for the time.
James. Thanks for bringing us together.
Of course.
Cheers. Thanks, James.
Bye, Marc.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, Lenny.